Picture walking through a mist-covered forest centuries ago, where shadows flicker beyond the veil of your vision, and the air hums softly with the whispers of things not entirely of this world. Imagine the damp earth beneath your feet releasing the musky scent of moss and decaying leaves, the chilled breeze carrying an almost imperceptible vibration, like a secret waiting just out of reach. In that liminal space between day and dusk, there's a silence that feels both eternal and expectant, as if you stand on the edge of a forgotten story. Long ago, there existed stories of strange entities, beings now vanished from our collective memory, known in hushed tones as the Void People. These elusive figures weren't beings of flesh and blood as we know, but something altogether different, intangible and haunting. Once, these Void People filled the imaginations and fears of scattered ancient communities, their presence woven into tales that trickled through the valleys of medieval Europe and the far-flung forests of Asia. Yet now, their stories have faded, reduced to footnotes in dusty folklore tomes, whispered only by a handful of scholars and myth enthusiasts daring to peer into the shadows of our past. So who were the Void People? What secrets did these strange beings hold? And why, amidst a world bursting with stories and legends, did they fade into silence? The answers lie buried deep within ancient culture, dark myth, and the human psyche, waiting for us to rediscover. This might be the strangest thing about the Void People. They were not simply creatures or spirits in the usual sense, but existed literally as gaps, voids in reality itself. Folklorists like Catharine Briggs, a luminary in the study of supernatural beings, described them as ephemeral forms, almost like shadows without substance, or how echoes might take on a shape. Ancient chroniclers wrote of these empty figures, seen at the periphery of vision, flickering in and out like shapes of smoke caught in a shaft of moonlight. Unlike ghosts or fairies that interact with the world, the Void People were said to absorb sound and light, almost as if they were living holes puncturing the fabric of existence. You might wonder, why create legends about invisible voids? What did they represent? In many ways, the Void People symbolized what ancient peoples struggled to understand: the spaces of absence, loss, and ungraspable fear. Imagine a 12th century villager returning home after tending sheep near the edge of the woods, glancing into the dark and sensing a presence not marked by eyes or limbs, but by empty silence, a presence that seemed to swallow the world around it. These tales served as a way to name the unknown voids in human experience: loneliness, death, and the terrifying vastness of the unseen. In Norse sagas and Celtic lore, similar entities appeared, sometimes described as thin men or the unseen ones. In Icelandic folklore, for example, there are stories of Husvitir household spirits that could be felt but not fully seen, often described ambiguously as parts of the space itself rather than discrete beings. These accounts resemble the notion of the Void People, entities occupying the borderlands between matter and nothingness. The tales seem to function as nature's version of security cameras, ancient psychological tools alerting communities to something out of place, a disruption in the natural order. Folklore scholar Patricia Lysett noted that in 17th century Ireland, similar void-like figures were thought to be omens of misfortune, appearing in the folds of fog or in the blink of an eye. But these were not simple portents. They embodied the tension between presence and absence, between what is known and what slips forever beyond understanding. This should be no surprise, as many ancient myths grapple with the concept of the void, not only as an external threat, but as an internal state of being. However, these stories weren't merely to frighten or mystify. The Void People were, in a way, the original environmental activists of their time. Their tales taught respect for the boundaries of the natural world. Enter the woods unprepared, and you may step into an empty place that consumes your voice, your light, your very sense of self. Imagine the sound of footsteps fading into silence, felt rather than heard. These empty places reminded people to pay attention, to listen to the rhythms of nature, and observe what was not said. The Void People embodied the subtle warnings from the environment that many accepted as ancient therapy sessions for community survival. But the Void People were more than just mysterious spaces. The stories tell us something else, that they were deeply connected to the concept of disappearance and loss. Take the tale recorded in Grimm's fairy tales from 19th century Germany. It tells of a young girl named Lise who wanders into a thicket, said to be haunted by the Void People. The thick trees seemed to fold around her, swallowing the sounds of her breath and the crunch of leaves beneath her feet. Suddenly, a figure appears, not quite flesh, not quite shadow, reaching out with empty hands. "Do you seek what you've lost?" it whispers. Lise, trembling, nods. The figure vanishes, leaving behind a stillness heavier than before. When she returns to the village, her voice is changed, quieter, as if part of her memory has been hollowed out by that encounter. Scholars analyzing this tale suggest it reflects the human encounter with grief, the void left by loss, which absorbs the light and sound of the world. The Void People, then, become a metaphor for mourning and the intangible weight of absence in human life. Across the centuries, these void-like figures flickered in and out of folklore, never fully forming as complete creatures, but always present as something felt rather than seen. The Edo period in Japan offers an intriguing parallel with stories of Kage Muko, or shadow creatures believed to exist in the spaces between silhouettes and the surfaces they fall upon. Much like the Void People, they are there, only in the absence of light or the in-between moments, emphasizing the ephemeral nature of existence. Yet beneath this behavior lies a larger cultural truth. The Void People were, in some ways, medieval social workers. Their haunting presences enforced the rules of boundaries. Do not stray too far. Do not delve too deeply into forbidden knowledge or places. Do not forget the respect owed to the natural and spiritual order. They were guardians of limits, reminding communities of the dangers that arise when one crosses unseen thresholds. But as the world grew smaller, with the advance of science and rationalism, the terrifying mystery of the Void People began to fade. By the 19th century, with the rise of the industrial age, people no longer lived so close to the forests or the raw forces of nature. The stories that once served as guides for surviving the wilderness and confronting the void became mere folklore, relegated to collections and parlor tales. The role of the Void People was replaced by technology, cameras, alarms, and even modern psychology attempting to map and fill those gaps in our understanding. What was once the enigmatic emptiness between worlds became data points and equations. But there's more to this story than just loss and disappearance. What these tales really reveal is how our ancestors experienced the unknown, not as an enemy to conquer, but as a liminal space to respect. Not as a silent void to fear alone, but as a part of the human experience encompassing absence, grief, and the unknowable depths of nature itself. This reveals something deeper about our modern condition. Today, we often fear the void in a different way, not the mystical kind lurking at the edge of a forest, but the existential emptiness that creeps into busy lives, the silence behind the endless noise. The Void People, seen from this perspective, remind us of what we have lost, a relationship with mystery itself, with the quiet spaces where the world's secrets once whispered. In the oldie world, these beings weren't just stories. They were reflections of a reality where the boundary between presence and absence was fluid, where reality itself held spaces of unanswered questions. And it's in these spaces, the voids, that we might find echoes of something ancient and profound. As we continue this journey into the strange origins of the Void People, we'll explore how their legends spread across continents, how they shaped human understanding of absence and presence, and what they reveal about our own need to confront and embrace the unknown. Because these stories are not just relics, they are living portals to a time when the world still held mysteries worth protecting, when the void wasn't just empty, but full of possibility. Stay with me, for the shadows are just beginning to stir. Now, imagine, deep in the frozen wastes of northern Europe, where the wind howls like the voices of the lost, there's a legend preserved in the annals of Norse history, recorded not in grand sagas of gods and heroes, but in whispered warnings from humble villagers. The Void People, or as some called them, the Gap Walkers, were said to appear suddenly at the edge of vision, never fully visible but manifest as yawning emptiness, a distortion where the light refused to settle. One such tale comes from 13th century Iceland, where a farmer named Eirik ventured too close to the dark fen late one autumn evening. The mists curled thick like wool around his ankles, and as he passed, the sound of the river fading behind him seemed swallowed by an unnatural silence. Then in the very corner of his eye, a shape without form, a hollow void, darker than shadow, folded itself between reeds. Irik's breath caught, but he dared not look directly. The entity seemed to pulse, and with a cold rush, it stretched its empty hand as if to grasp the very warmth in his chest. "What do you seek in this endless hollow?" came a voice, devoid of sound yet heavy with meaning. Frozen with fear and wonder, Irik felt the void growing inside him, an aching emptiness stealing hope, and when dawn painted the sky, he was found wandering mute, his eyes reflecting an abyss. The villagers spoke then of the Void People not merely as creatures, but as the embodiment of the unknown's appetite, feeding on the soul's light in moments of despair, loss, and forgotten memories. This might be the strangest thing about the Void People. Unlike ghosts that haunt a place or spirits that linger with a purpose, they were marks of something missing, living negations, a negative imprint upon the world that erased presence rather than asserted it. They were neither friend nor foe, but the threshold itself, a reminder that absence can be as potent as presence. Folklorists like Catharine Briggs highlighted that these void-like figures disrupted the very laws of perception, showing themselves only at the boundaries of reality, where the human mind struggled to hold form against emptiness. This dissonance unsettled ancestral communities, for it forced a confrontation with silence and absence, not passive gaps, but active forces that could absorb warmth, sound, and identity, swallowing the tendrils of being itself. But the Void People were more than mere metaphors for disappearance. They symbolized the intimate human confrontation with grief and liminality. Travel back to 19th century rural Germany, deep into Grimm's fairy tales territory, where stories chronicled not just monsters but complex human emotions. One such story tells of Lise, a young girl trailing behind her flock near the forest edge. The thick air clung to her skin, and the crunch of frosted leaves seemed unnaturally muted. Suddenly, a figure emerged, neither dark nor light, but a hollow outline that seemed to distort space, a void person. "Do you seek what you've lost?" it whispered, voice like a distant echo without origin. Trembling, Lise nodded. The figure's fingers reached toward her heart, vanishing as silence crushed the world around her. When she returned, her songs were quieter, her laughter a memory. To the scholars of folklore, this was no ordinary ghost story. It was a living allegory for mourning, the void left in a person when grief unspools and fractures identity. The Void People became walking elegies, reminders that loss is a place within us where sound and light stop, leaving only hollow spaces waiting to be filled, or forever darkened. This reveals something deeper about human culture. The Void People functioned much like ancient therapy sessions, spaces created by storytelling where communities could express unspeakable losses and fears. They involuntarily embodied the experience of absence, teaching people that silence and emptiness were not enemies to be vanquished, but territories to be navigated with respect. In Japan's Edo period, parallel legends emerge with the Kage Muko, shadow beings caught between the outline of an object and the light falling upon it. These shadows were thought to be fleeting, easily overlooked, yet holding the power to disrupt perception and sanity. The Void People and their kin echoed this liminal power, marking thresholds where day touched night and life met death. Like nature's security cameras, they signaled breaches in boundaries, alerting communities to dangers both physical and psychological. Yet beneath this behavior lay a societal function. Seen from a medieval perspective, the Void People acted as social workers of the night, guardians of limits and boundaries. Their ominous presence was a way to enforce norms about wilderness and the unknown, reminding people not to stray too close to forbidden places, dark forests, haunted swamps, or the edge of reality itself. They embodied the warnings whispered by the earth. Respect what you do not understand, for some voids are hollows that consume more than just sound. They eat the soul's light and leave behind emptiness that can never be filled. This should be no surprise since many cultures viewed the wilderness as a living force, simultaneously nurturing and dangerous. A realm where the ordinary rules broke down and the void beckoned as a consequence of reckless intrusion. But as centuries passed and the world changed, so too did the Void People. The rise of modernity transformed how people related to mystery and absence. As communities moved away from dense forests and closer to cities illuminated by gaslight and electricity, the spaces for shadows and voids shrank. The deep, off-filled respect for the unknown morphed into anxiety and skepticism. By the 19th and 20th centuries, the Void People receded into the background of folklore, replaced by new forms of voids, such as psychological emptiness diagnosed by psychiatry or the cold, anonymous spaces of urban life. Modern technology, cameras, motion sensors, and sound detectors, attempted to fill the voids once marked by these shadowy figures. Where once a void might consume a traveler's voice in the woods, now a cell phone or flashlight destroyed that emptiness with light and sound. We tried to measure and control what could not be understood, transforming mystery into data points. The Void People faded not because the void disappeared, but because we lost the language to recognize and respect it. But there's more to this story. The Void People, in their elusive form, illuminate a powerful truth about existence itself. That absence shapes presence, that what is missing holds as much weight as what is there. They embody the concept of non-being not as nothingness, but as a kind of inverted presence, a shadow realm that reminds us of our own fragility where light fails and certainty dissolves. In this way, they become symbols of the human condition, our inevitable encounters with loss, the fleeting nature of memory, and the spaces in our lives where meaning seems to vanish. This should be no surprise, as ancient myths often grappled with the void, not only as an external force, but as an internal landscape. The Void People were mirrors reflecting the inner shadows we carry, the forgotten corners of the mind where silence prevails. In the oldie world, acknowledging these voids was a way to integrate grief and fear into communal life, ensuring that darkness was not ignored, but given form and voice through story. What these tales really reveal is the wisdom in embracing mystery, not as something to be conquered or filled, but as a necessary dimension of human experience. Today, when we rush through lives consumed by noise and distraction, we have largely lost touch with the void's quiet power. The Void People remind us that silence is not absence of meaning but a presence in itself, waiting to be acknowledged and understood. Like a sacred space between worlds, the void invites us to pause and reflect, to listen to what is not said, and to hold space for loss and transformation. So the question remains, why did the Void People disappear from our stories? It's because as societies became more rational and technology promised answers, the ambiguous and unsettling spaces they inhabited were erased or explained away. We traded wonder for control, mystery for certainty, and in doing so laid claim to a smaller, less enchanted world. But the Void People endure, if only as flickers in our peripheral vision, echoes of a time when human life moved harmoniously alongside the shadows and silences of nature. As we close this chapter on the strange origins of the Void People, consider this. These entities were not just legends but living lessons, ancient guardians of the liminal spaces where life and death, presence and absence, light and shadow converge. They taught our ancestors that the void is never empty, but full of possibility and power. Their fading should not mark a final disappearance, but an invitation to rediscover what it means to walk in the spaces between worlds once again. Perhaps next time you find yourself at the edge of a dark forest, or in a quiet moment where all sound fades, remember the Void People. Listen closely to the silence. They may still be there, waiting to remind us that even in absence, there is a story yet to be told. And so, as we step back from these shadows, I invite you to reflect on your own relationship with the unknown. How do you face the voids in your life? What stories have been lost, and what might be found again by embracing silence rather than fearing it? These ancient tales offer more than mere fright. They offer healing, respect, and connection to the mysteries our ancestors once reverently guarded. Let us not allow these stories to fade entirely into silence. Instead, let us breathe life into the void once more, honoring the Void People as teachers of absence and guardians of the sacred unknown. For in the embracing of emptiness, we may find a deeper fullness. Thank you for journeying into the strange, haunting origins of the Void People. Until next time, may your steps be steady between light and shadow, and may you never fear the silence where the void quietly waits.